The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as Admiral Zextar of the Korthak Empire stood before the assembled delegates, his forearms spread wide, displaying the traditional gesture of triumph among his people. The massive holographic display behind him showed a blue and green world, scarred with the fresh wounds of orbital bombardment. Council members. Zextar's voice boomed through the chamber's translation systems. I stand before you today to announce the successful conquest of the primitive world known as Earth. The human resistance has been crushed, their primitive weapons no match for the might of the Korthak fleet. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Representatives from dozens of species shifted in their seats, some nodding approval, while others exchanged worried glances. The humans had been a curiosity to the council, a young species that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel. Yet they had managed to establish several colonies beyond their home system. Councillor Urix of the Zentori Federation leaned forward in her crystalline chair. Admiral, surely you mean the human government has surrendered? Complete conquest of an entire species seems excessive for such a minor territorial dispute. The Korthak Admiral's mandibles clicked in what his species considered laughter. Counselor, you misunderstand. The humans refused all reasonable terms. They would not abandon their illegal colonies in Korthak space. They even had the audacity to demand we recognize their territorial claims. Such insolence could not be tolerated. On the viewing platform reserved for neutral observers, Ambassador Chen Wei sat motionless. The elderly human diplomat had been attending council sessions for only 3 years. Ever since humanity had achieved the technological benchmarks required for associate membership, his weathered face showed no emotion, but his hands gripped the armrests of his chair until his knuckles turned white. The human military, Zextar continued, proved as primitive as our intelligence suggested. Their largest vessels barely measured 2 kilometers in length. Their weapons relied on crude kinetic projectiles and basic energy systems. Most amusing of all, they attempted to use nuclear weapons against our shielded dreadnoughts. Several council members chuckled at this. Nuclear weapons were considered obsolete by galactic standards, having been abandoned by most species thousands of years ago in favor of more sophisticated armaments. How many human vessels were destroyed in this conquest? Asked Councillor Thane of the Rigel Collective, his mechanical voice betraying a hint of curiosity. Their entire deep space fleet, Zextar replied proudly. Approximately 200 vessels of various sizes. The engagement lasted less than 6 standard hours. Our casualties were minimal. 3 frigates sustained minor damage, and we lost perhaps a dozen fighter craft to their desperate kamikaze attacks. Ambassador Chen finally spoke, his voice steady despite the tremor of rage beneath it. You attacked civilian colonies. The chamber fell silent. It was unusual for an observer to address the floor without permission, but given the circumstances, Protocol Master Vexon allowed it. Zextar's 4 eyes focused on the human ambassador. The colonies were illegal settlements in sovereign Korthak territory. They were given ample opportunity to evacuate. You gave them 6 hours, Chen said, standing slowly. 6 hours to evacuate colonies that housed millions of people. Families, children. The Korthak Empire is not responsible for the stubbornness of human colonists who chose to remain in harm's way, Zextar replied dismissively. Ambassador Chen walked to the center of the chamber, his movements deliberate and measured. Councilors, I request permission to present evidence regarding these alleged illegal settlements. Councillor Urix glanced at the other senior members before nodding. Permission granted, Ambassador. Chen activated his personal data pad, and a new holographic display materialized beside Zextar's triumphant imagery. It showed detailed star charts, territorial agreements, and timestamp records. The colonies in question, Chen began, were established under the Outer Rim Settlement Accords of 2387. The Korthak Empire was a signatory to these accords. The 3 systems, Kepler 442, Gliese 667c, and Wolf 1061, were designated as open territory for any species capable of successful colonization. Zextar's mandibles clicked irritably. Those accords were signed nearly 50 years ago, before the Korthak expansion into that sector. Claims change as empires grow. Claims change through proper diplomatic channels, Chen replied firmly. Not through unprovoked military action against civilian targets. He gestured to the display, which now showed population records. The Harmony colony on Kepler 442b housed 2.3 million people. New Geneva on Gliese 667cc had 1.8 million. Paradise on Wolf 1061c was home to 900,000 souls. The numbers hung in the air like an accusation. Several council members who had seemed amused by Zextar's account now appeared uncomfortable. Over 5 million human beings, Chen continued, living peaceful lives, farming, building families, contributing to local trade networks, and you bombed them from orbit without warning. They were given warning, Zextar protested. 6 hours to evacuate was more than generous for illegal squatters. Chen's composure finally cracked, his voice rising. 6 hours to evacuate 5 million people? Admiral, it takes longer than that just to process departure requests at a spaceport during normal operations. You knew they couldn't possibly evacuate everyone in time. That is not the concern of the Korthak Empire, Zextar said coldly. Weakness in logistics does not grant immunity from consequences. The chamber erupted in overlapping conversations as delegates debated the ethics of the Korthak action. Some species, particularly those with expansionist tendencies, supported Zextar's position. Others, especially those who had faced similar aggression in their histories, began voicing concerns about the precedent being set. Councillor Urix called for order. Ambassador Chen, while the Council sympathizes with human losses, the Korthak Empire's actions, however ruthless, do not appear to violate galactic law. Territorial disputes are typically resolved through military action when diplomacy fails. This wasn't a territorial dispute, Chen said quietly. This was genocide. Admiral Zextar didn't just attack our colonies. He targeted civilian evacuation ships. He bombed refugee camps. His forces hunted down escape pods and destroyed them for sport. Lies, Zextar roared. The human spreads propaganda to diminish our righteous victory. Chen activated another section of his display. Video feeds began playing. Grainy recordings from colony security systems, personal communicators, and emergency beacons. The images were difficult to watch. Massive Korthak dreadnoughts firing on clearly marked medical vessels, fighter squadrons pursuing unarmed transport ships, orbital platforms targeting evacuation sites. These recordings were transmitted to monitoring stations throughout the sector, Chen said. Some were broadcast on open frequencies as desperate pleas for help that never came. The chamber watched in growing horror as the evidence mounted. Children's voices could be heard in some recordings, asking their parents why the sky was burning. Emergency workers desperately trying to load wounded civilians onto the last functioning transport. A colony administrator making a final transmission as Korthak plasma beams carved through his settlement's shields. Councillor Thane's mechanical voice cut through the stunned silence. Admiral, these recordings appear authentic. Can you provide explanation for the targeting of clearly non-military assets? Zextar's confidence wavered slightly. In the heat of battle, mistakes occur. Human vessels attempted to ram our ships. All human craft were therefore considered hostile. Medical ships? Asked Councillor Urix. Evacuation transports carrying children? Human deception knows no bounds, Zextar replied, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. They would use civilian ships to mask military movements. Ambassador Chen had stopped watching the horrible footage and instead studied the faces of the council members. He saw the moment when their perception shifted, when Admiral Zextar transformed from a conquering hero to something much darker. Council members, Chen said softly, I did not come here today to seek justice for the dead. That time has passed. I came to deliver a message from my government. He paused, letting his words carry weight. Earth received Admiral Zextar's surrender demands 3 days ago. We rejected them. The Admiral seems to believe that our rejection combined with his successful attack on our outer colonies, means that Earth has fallen. He is mistaken. A chill seemed to settle over the chamber. Zextar's 4 eyes narrowed as he processed the human's words. Impossible, the Admiral said. Our fleets are in orbit around your homeworld as we speak. Your pathetic planetary defenses were swept aside in hours. Chen smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. It was not a pleasant expression. Admiral, he said quietly, you never made it to Earth. The holographic display shifted again, now showing real-time feeds from the Sol system. Council members leaned forward to study the images. Earth hung peacefully in space, its orbital shipyards and defense platforms intact and operational. Of the massive Korthak fleet that had supposedly conquered humanity's homeworld, there was no sign. Zextar stared at the display in confusion. This is some trick. Human technology cannot produce real-time imagery across such distances. You're right, Chen agreed. Human technology cannot. But our friends can. The chamber's main entrance dilated, and a figure glided in that caused every delegate to freeze in recognition. Tall, ethereal, and surrounded by a faint luminescent aura, the newcomer was immediately identifiable as one of the architects, the ancient species that had built most of the galaxy's infrastructure, and then mysteriously withdrawn from active participation in galactic affairs. The being spoke without moving its mouth, its words appearing directly in every mind present. Council members, we bring greetings and clarification. Protocol Master Vexon's voice cracked as he tried to maintain proper procedures. Honored Architect, the Council recognizes your presence. How may we serve? We do not seek service, but rather offer information. The Korthak fleet that departed for the Sol system 6 days ago no longer exists. The statement hit the chamber like a physical blow. Zextar stumbled backward, his 4 arms trembling. Impossible, he whispered. The 3rd battle fleet was the pride of the Empire. 50 dreadnoughts, 200 cruisers, over 1,000 escort vessels. Even the humans' homeworld fleet couldn't. The humans' homeworld fleet was not involved, the architect continued. The Korthak vessels were eliminated before reaching the inner system. Chen watched as understanding slowly dawned on the faces around him. Admiral, when you attacked our colonies, you made a fundamental error. You assumed we were alone. The architect's presence seemed to fill the chamber with an otherworldly calm that made the preceding chaos feel distant and surreal. Council members who had been arguing moments before now sat in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of what they had just heard. Admiral Zextar's composure completely shattered. His 4 arms flailed as he turned frantically between the architect and the viewing screen that still showed Earth, peaceful and intact. This is impossible. My fleet commanders reported successful engagement with human forces. I received confirmed destruction reports from their homeworld's orbital defenses. Ambassador Chen stepped closer to the Admiral, his elderly frame somehow appearing more imposing than the massive Korthak warrior. Tell me, Admiral, when exactly did you receive these reports? 2 days ago, Zextar replied automatically. Then his eyes widened as the implication hit him. But the transmission delay from Sol system would be over 4 days one way with your communication technology, Chen finished. Which means the reports you received were sent before your fleet even arrived at Earth. The mathematical impossibility hung in the air like an accusation. Several council members began checking their own datapads, confirming the transmission delays involved. Councillor Erix's crystalline features shifted through several color phases as she processed the information. Admiral, she said slowly, if Ambassador Chen is correct, then those reports were either fabricated or sent by someone who wanted you to believe your fleet had succeeded, Chen interrupted. Someone who needed you to come here today, confident in your victory, and publicly describe your war crimes to the entire Galactic Council. The architect moved forward with that peculiar gliding motion that made it seem as if space itself was rearranging to accommodate its presence. We shall provide clarification of events. The human colonies attacked by Korthak forces were indeed destroyed as described. The loss of life was significant, Fresh murmurs of horror swept through the chamber as the delegates realized they hadn't been watching fictional propaganda. The recordings of children crying, of medical ships burning, of entire settlements being reduced to radioactive craters. It had all been real. However, the architect continued, the humans' response to this aggression was not what Admiral Zextar anticipated. Rather than mobilizing their primitive fleet in a futile defense of their homeworld, they did something unexpected. A new holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing the Sol system in three-dimensional detail. Earth sat at the center, surrounded by its moon, orbital stations, and the red planet Mars, with its growing colonies. They asked for help, Chen said quietly. Not from their government, not from their military, but from their friends. Personal friends they had made during their brief time as associate council members. The display zoomed in to show Mars, revealing something that made several council members gasp in recognition. Elegant spires rose from the planet's surface. Architecture that was unmistakably Centauri in origin. Massive crystalline gardens stretched across the Martian landscape, their geometric patterns clearly showing Rigel collective engineering. In orbit, sleek vessels bearing the distinctive curves of Andromedan shipyards moved alongside human craft. 3 years ago, Chen continued, when humanity achieved associate membership status, we were overwhelmed. Here we were, a species that had barely figured out how to travel between stars, suddenly exposed to technologies and cultures that were thousands of years ahead of us. He gestured to the display, which now showed similar structures throughout the Sol system. Most species, when they reach council membership, go through a period of isolation while they try to catch up technologically. They're afraid of being seen as primitive, of being taken advantage of revealing their weaknesses. But humans are social creatures by nature, added a new voice from the chamber's entrance. Another figure entered, tall, graceful, with skin that shimmered like starlight. A Centauri delegate, but not one normally assigned to the council. Ambassador Lyrian? Counselor Irix's voice carried surprise. You should be at the Federation's capital. What brings you to the council chambers? Lyrian moved to stand beside Chen, her crystalline features showing something that might have been a smile. My government sent me to clarify our position regarding the human situation. She activated her own data display, showing detailed economic records. When humans first joined the council as associates, they did something no other species had attempted. Instead of trying to hide their technological limitations, they embraced them. They openly asked for help, offered what they could in return, and formed genuine partnerships with anyone willing to work with them. The records scrolled past, showing trade agreements, technology exchanges, and collaborative research projects. Unlike the typical formal arrangements between galactic civilizations, these contracts had an unusual personal quality to them. The human colony on Kepler 442b wasn't just a human settlement, Lyrian explained. It was a joint agricultural project with the Centauri Federation. We had been working together for 2 years to develop crops that could grow in that system's unique soil conditions. The research station on New Geneva was a collaborative effort with the Rigel Collective to study the interaction between biological and artificial intelligence. Admiral Zextar's mandibles clicked nervously. That doesn't change anything. They were illegal settlements in Korthak space. Actually, said another new voice, it changes everything. A third figure entered the chamber. This one clearly artificial. A being of gleaming metal and crystal matrices. Counselor Thane's head swiveled to focus on the newcomer with obvious recognition. Prime Unit Designation, Nexus 7, Thane announced formally. Representative of the Collective Command Authority. Your presence indicates consensus protocol activation. The artificial being's optical sensors swept the chamber before focusing on Admiral Zextar. Affirmative. The Rigel Collective formally invokes Defense Protocol 7 under the Mutual Research Accord with Humanity. A chill settled over the chamber. Defense Protocol 7 was rarely invoked. It represented a formal commitment by the technologically advanced collective to protect their research partners using any means necessary. You cannot be serious, Zextar sputtered. Defense protocols for such a primitive species? Primitive? Nexus 7's voice carried what could only be described as amusement. despite coming from artificial vocal processors. Admiral, are you familiar with human problem-solving methodologies? Without waiting for an answer, the artificial being activated its own display. 1 year ago, the collective presented humanity with a theoretical problem that our greatest minds had been unable to solve for 3 centuries. It involved the integration of biological creativity with artificial processing power. We estimated it would take them decades to even understand the fundamental concepts involved. The display showed complex mathematical formulas and engineering schematics. The humans solved it in 6 days. Not only did they solve it, they identified 17 additional applications we had never considered and designed 3 completely new theoretical frameworks for future research. Counselor Irix leaned forward. That seems unlikely. Human cognitive processes operate differently than most species, Lyrian explained. Where we see obstacles, they see puzzles to solve. Where we see limitations, they see opportunities for creativity. In 3 years of collaboration, they have advanced Zentori agricultural science by what would normally take us decades. Ambassador Chen had remained quiet during these revelations, but now he stepped forward again. The point is, Admiral, when you attacked our colonies, you weren't just attacking humans. You were attacking Joint Federation agricultural projects. You were destroying collective research stations. You were murdering citizens of a dozen different species who had chosen to live and work alongside us. The horror of this realization began to sink in among the council members. An attack on research colonies was bad enough, but an attack on joint projects involving multiple species carried far more serious implications. The Andromedan Science Collective also had researchers on New Geneva, added another voice. Yet another figure entered the chamber, this one bearing the flowing robes and extra limbs characteristic of the Andromedan species. Ambassador Veltar, Chen nodded respectfully. Thank you for coming. The collective mourns the loss of our researchers, Veltar said solemnly. Dr. Kesson and her team were on the verge of a breakthrough in quantum biology. Their work with human Dr. Sarah Martinez had already produced 3 papers that revolutionized our understanding of consciousness transfer. Admiral Zextar looked around the chamber desperately. These are minor collaborations. Research projects. They don't justify. Minor? The architect's mental voice cut through his protests like a blade. Admiral, do you understand what you have done? The ancient being gestured, and the central display changed to show a complex web of connections spreading out from the Sol system. Lines of light connected Earth and its colonies to dozens of worlds throughout the galaxy, each representing partnerships, research projects, and collaborative efforts. In 3 standard years, the architect continued, humanity has formed more genuine partnerships with other species than most civilizations develop in 3 centuries. They have contributed to advances in agriculture, artificial intelligence, quantum mechanics, biological sciences, and social organization. Their colony worlds had become centers of interspecies cooperation. The web of connections pulsed with activity, showing the flow of information, resources, and people between human settlements and the rest of the galaxy. And in 6 hours of orbital bombardment, Admiral Zextar destroyed not just human lives, but ongoing projects that involved 17 different species. Research that cannot be replaced. Friendships that took years to build, trust that may never be restored. Zextar staggered backward as the full scope of his actions became clear. We didn't know. Intelligence reports indicated purely human settlements. Your intelligence reports were deliberately limited, Chen said grimly, because acknowledging the true nature of those colonies would have made it impossible to justify your attack. Your empire wanted those systems for their resources, not their strategic value. So you convinced yourselves that the settlements were illegal and isolated. But they weren't isolated, Lyrian added. They were connected to half the galaxy through the relationships humans had built. And when you attacked them, those relationships didn't disappear, Nexus 7 finished. They became something else entirely. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Finally, Counselor Urix spoke the question that was on everyone's mind. Ambassador Chen, what happened to the Korthak fleet that was sent to Earth? Chen looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates from dozens of species. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried clearly to every corner of the room. They discovered that humanity isn't alone anymore, and that our friends take the murder of their researchers very personally indeed. The silence in the chamber stretched for long moments before Admiral Zex-Tar found his voice again. You're bluffing. No alliance of primitives could destroy a full Korthak battle fleet. Our ships are the most advanced in this sector. Ambassador Chen's weathered face showed something that might have been pity. Admiral, you still don't understand. This isn't about advanced technology or superior firepower. This is about something your empire has never learned to value. He gestured to the gathered representatives who had entered the chamber. When word reached Earth that our colonies had been destroyed, our government didn't immediately mobilize our fleet. Instead, they did what humans do best. They talked to their friends. Lyrian stepped forward, her crystalline features shifting through patterns of grief and determination. The Zentori Federation received Earth's distress call within hours of the colony attacks. Our Council of Elders met in emergency session, as did the Rigel Collective's Command Authority, Nexus 7 added. The loss of our joint research facilities was unacceptable. Ambassador Veltar's multiple arms, gestured in what humans had learned, was an Andromedan expression of resolve. The Science Collective voted unanimously. Such aggression against collaborative research could not be tolerated. But it wasn't just the major powers, Chen continued. The message went out through every communication network humans had access to. Personal friendships, research partnerships, trade relationships. Within 12 hours, we had offers of support from 47 different species. Admiral Zex-Tar's confidence was cracking. Support? What kind of support could such primitives provide? The kind of support, said a new voice from the chamber entrance, that money cannot buy and conquest cannot achieve. The speaker was unlike any being present in the chamber. Roughly humanoid but clearly not human, with features that seemed to shift and blur, as if existing partially outside normal space. Several council members gasped in recognition. This was one of the Void Runners, the mysterious species that controlled much of the galaxy's faster-than-light communication network. Speaker Kethval, Protocol Master Vexon managed. The Void Runners haven't attended a council session in over a century. A better send. We attend when the network itself is threatened, Kethval replied. The Korthak attack on human colonies damaged 17 communication relays that were part of joint human Void Runner maintenance projects. The implications of this revelation rippled through the chamber. The Void Runner's communication network was essential for galactic civilization. An attack on their infrastructure was tantamount to an attack on the galaxy itself. But that wasn't the worst of it, Chen said quietly. Admiral, your fleet's approach to Earth was detected long before it reached the outer system. Our friends had time to prepare. The central display activated again, showing the Sol system from a tactical perspective. Earth sat at the center. But the view was dominated by something else entirely. A defensive formation, unlike anything most council members had ever seen. Zentori crystal ships, Chen began, pointing to elegant vessels that seemed to be grown rather than built. Designed for defense, powered by stellar energy, nearly indestructible. Rigel Collective automated defense platforms. Nexus 7 added proudly. Artificial intelligence networks capable of coordinating defensive fire across multiple systems simultaneously. Andromedan science vessels, Veltar noted. Equipped with experimental weapons that exist in theoretical physics textbooks, but have never been tested in combat. And Void Runner ships, Kethval said simply, which can move through space in ways your tactical systems cannot track or predict. Admiral Zex-Tar stared at the display in growing horror. This is an illegal military alliance. The Council prohibits such arrangements between associate members and full species. Councillor Urix's crystalline features, shifted to what humans had learned, indicated confusion. Admiral, I see no military alliance here. These appear to be individual species, choosing to defend joint research projects and collaborative settlements. The legal distinction is important, agreed Councillor Thane. Each species acted independently to protect their own citizens and projects. No formal alliance was required. But how did they coordinate so quickly? Zextar demanded. Such a defense would require planning, communication protocols, command structures. They used the same systems they had been using for 3 years, Chen explained. The research networks, the trade communications, the personal friendships. When humans asked for help, the response wasn't a formal military alliance. It was 47 different species, each deciding that they had a personal stake in protecting Earth. The architect moved forward again, its presence causing the chamber's lighting to shift subtly. We shall describe the engagement for the Council's record. Another display materialized, showing the outer edge of the Sol system. The massive Korthak fleet was clearly visible, approaching in standard battle formation. Dreadnoughts at the center, cruisers in supporting positions, fighters screening the flanks. The Korthak fleet dropped out of hyperspace approximately 18 billion kilometers from Earth, the architect narrated. They immediately began active scanning for human defensive positions. The display showed the fleet's sensors sweeping space, identifying targets. A few human vessels were visible, small patrol craft and orbital defense platforms that looked pathetically inadequate compared to the approaching armada. Admiral Zex Tar transmitted his surrender demands and gave Earth 6 hours to comply. The architect continued. The human government's response was immediate and unambiguous. A communication transcript appeared on the display. Earth to Korthak Fleet. We reject your demands. You have committed acts of genocide against innocent civilians. Prepare to face the consequences of your actions. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. The response was hardly what they would expect from a primitive species facing overwhelming odds. The Korthak fleet began advancing toward Earth, the architect continued. They detected the defensive vessels waiting in Earth's orbit and dismissed them as insignificant, because they were insignificant. Zextar protested. A few dozen human ships cannot threaten a battle fleet. The human ships were not the threat, Kethval said quietly. We were. The display suddenly came alive with activity. Space around the Korthak fleet began to ripple and distort as vessels emerged from what appeared to be empty vacuum. Zentari crystal ships materialized from stealth fields that bent light around them. Rigel collective platforms deployed from dimensional storage compartments. Andromedan science vessels phased into normal space from experimental quantum states. But most disturbing of all were the Void Runner ships, which didn't appear so much as simply exist where they hadn't existed moments before. Impossible, Zextar breathed. No stealth technology is that advanced. Our sensors would have detected. Your sensors detected exactly what we wanted them to detect, Nexus 7 explained. The collective's artificial intelligence networks had been studying Korthak military doctrine for weeks. We knew exactly how your ships would approach, exactly what they would scan for, exactly how they would position themselves. And we prepared accordingly, Lyrian added. Zentori defensive doctrine emphasizes patience and perfect positioning. We had been moving our ships into optimal positions for days. The tactical display showed the true scope of the trap that had been laid. The Korthak fleet was completely surrounded, caught in a perfect sphere of defensive positions that covered every possible escape route. The engagement lasted 17 minutes, the architect said clinically. The Korthak fleet attempted to break out in 3 different directions. Each attempt was contained and neutralized. Admiral Zextar watched in horror as the display showed his mighty fleet being systematically destroyed. The dreadnoughts that had seemed so powerful were torn apart by coordinated fire from multiple species. The fighters that had terrorized human colonies found themselves unable to target enemies that existed partially outside normal space. But even combined, your forces shouldn't have been enough, Zextar stammered. The numbers, the firepower ratios, you calculated based on individual species capabilities, Chen explained. But that's not how this worked. For 3 years, our researchers and engineers had been learning from each other, sharing techniques, combining technologies. The result, Veltar noted, was defensive systems that incorporated the best aspects of multiple species approaches. Zentori energy shields, powered by Rigel efficiency algorithms and reinforced with Andromedan quantum stabilizers. Weapons platforms that combined traditional firepower with Voidrunner spatial manipulation techniques, Kethval added. Projectiles that could alter their course mid-flight. Energy beams that could bend around obstacles. And coordination systems, Nexus 7 concluded, that allowed dozens of species to fight as a single entity while each maintaining their individual tactical preferences. The display showed the final moments of the battle. The last few Korthak ships, realizing their situation was hopeless, attempted to surrender. They transmitted standard military surrender codes and powered down their weapons. "Did you accept their surrender?" Counselor Urix asked quietly. Chen's expression grew grim. "We offered them the same terms they offered our colonies. 6 hours to evacuate their ships before we destroyed them." But that's impossible," Zextar protested. "You cannot evacuate a dreadnought crew of 50,000 in 6 hours." "No," Chen agreed. "You cannot." Which is exactly what we told them. The implications hung heavy in the chamber. Several council members looked away from the display, unable to watch the inevitable conclusion. "However," Chen continued, "unlike the Korthak Empire, we are not genocidal monsters." The defending fleets gave the Korthak survivors a choice. The display showed escape pods launching from the doomed vessels, thousands of them, streaming away from the battle zone. Immediate surrender and evacuation to prison facilities, or death with their ships, Chen explained. Most chose to surrender. About 30% chose to die with their vessels. "Where are the survivors?" Counselor Urix asked. "Safe," Chen replied. "Being held in comfortable detention facilities on various worlds throughout the galaxy. They will be tried for war crimes under galactic law, but they will be treated according to the standards of civilized species." Admiral Zextar had collapsed into his chair, the full scope of his situation finally dawning on him. The Empire. What will happen to the Empire? "That," said the architect, "depends entirely on what the Empire chooses to do next." Ambassador Chen turned to face the assembled council members. "The Korthak Empire can choose to acknowledge that they committed acts of genocide against innocent civilians. They can choose to make reparations to the families of those killed and to the species whose research projects were destroyed. They can choose to join the galactic community as cooperative members rather than aggressive conquerors." He paused, his eyes finding Admiral Zextar. "Or they can choose to view this as an act of war against their empire, in which case they will discover that 47 species take a very dim view of genocide, and that humanity's friends are both numerous and extremely creative when it comes to defensive warfare." The chamber fell silent as the weight of Chen's words settled over the assembled delegates. Finally, Counselor Urix spoke. "Ambassador Chen, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to express our appreciation for the restraint shown by the defending forces. The loss of life was significant, but it could have been much worse." Chen nodded gravely. "Council members, humanity entered this galaxy as strangers looking for friends. We found them among your people. Individuals who were willing to work with us, learn from us, and teach us in return. When those friendships were attacked, our friends responded not with conquest or revenge, but with protection." He gestured to the representatives of the various species who had come to Earth's defense. "This is what the galaxy can become when species choose cooperation over domination, when they build relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear." "And what happens now?" Counselor Thane asked. "Now," Chen said with a slight smile, "we get back to work. There are research projects to rebuild, colonies to replant, and friendships to strengthen. The galaxy is a very big place, with room for everyone who chooses to be a good neighbor." As the session concluded and the delegates began to file out, Admiral Zextar remained in his seat, staring at the displays that still showed the wreckage of his fleet. The magnitude of his empire's miscalculation was finally becoming clear. They hadn't just attacked a primitive species, they had attacked the galactic community itself. And now, they would have to live with the consequences of